part of our plenary session. Our next speaker is Sarah Ahannach. She's working on a PhD in the group of Sarah Lebeer at the University of Antwerp. And she's one of the driving forces behind Isala, which is a large citizen science project. In this session, Sarah brings to you the story of a citizen science project that became really personal, of asking much but giving a lot in return, of a perfect combo of science and societal participation.
Okay, do you hear me well? All right. I think this mic is not curly hair friendly, but thank you very much. All right, just gonna hold it like this. Hi, everyone. It's the curly hair. Yeah, maybe. Voila. Okay. This is a bit more curly hair friendly. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and today I'm here to tell you about Isala and our intimate journey. There's a little bit of... So I'm Sarah, I'm part of the Isala lab and Isala project, which is in the lab of Professor Sarah Lebeer. This is the lab of applied microbiology and biotechnology at the University of Antwerp. If you're interested in all the kinds of projects that we do, have a look at our website. And here in the middle, you see Professor Sarah Lebeer. She's our project lead. But let's get right into it. I'm not going to go super sciencey, but just for the sake of, I'll tell you about the microbiome. So the human microbiome is a collection of the DNA of all the microorganisms in and on our body. And for the last 40 years, there were no breakthroughs in managing and bladder infections and vaginal infections. The WHO also reported an increase in these infections. And I'm here to tell you why we should care, because it would be funny if I said, let's just move past that. The vaginal microbiome is actually very important for the prevention of vaginal diseases, but also for successful fertilizations and healthy pregnancies. It's not just relevant for women, but for their partners and their children as well. And we want to study the healthy states. We want to study what are healthy vaginal microorganisms. We see a lot of teams studying disease states, but for us it's important, how can you get to these healthy states without knowing it? And this inspired us to set up the Isala project. As one of the speakers before told you about citizen science, Isala is a citizen science project with many goals. Our scientific goals are quite clear. We want to map the female microbiome and the presence of lactobacilli in women in Belgium. We want to study the impact of lifestyle and environmental factors on it. And we also want to set up a biobank with all these vaginal bacteria, grow them and study them as well. But I'm here also to tell you about our societal impact goals. So what are our goals? We want to break the taboo on vaginal health. We want to stimulate women to co-create with us. We want to empower women to take their health into their own hands. And I want to say this a bit literally, because they also have to take their own samples. And of course, we want to bring women more into the picture when it comes to science. So let's get a little bit theoretical. Where is Isala's place in the citizen science pyramid? We see our participants, but also our ambassadors, having more collaborative and contributory role. So for collaborative, we see them as helping break the taboo with us and spreading the scientific information, but also contributory to asking research questions, to co-create with us, and a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking, because our participants come up with really cool ideas and things that you're like, oh, I haven't thought about that. So how did we do this? And more specifically, where did we start? Well, what's our story? We were inspired by Isala van Diest. Isala van Diest was the very first female physician in Belgium. She was not allowed to study medicine in her day, so she went to Switzerland. She studied there medicine, came back to Belgium, was not allowed to practice medicine, went to the UK, came back to Belgium, still not allowed to practice medicine, and then she changed the law. So she's really a role model for us. She's an activist, she's a feminist. So as an ode to her, we named our project Isala. And then, of course, I also want to share a little bit of subtle but taboo-breaking logo with the Isala underwear. And I'm also going to go a bit deeper into some tips and tricks if we want to communicate a little bit of an intimate project and how we do it with Isala. It doesn't necessarily have to work for you, but just in case. So we use the U format. It's not really in English very easy, but if you speak Dutch, there is this polite, or French, you have a polite version and a more informal version. That's the way we talk with our participants and the broader public. We also really don't shy away of using scientific terms because we really want to increase scientific literacy in the broader public, but we explain them very well. So for us, it's very important that our participants know what the microbiome is and that not every time we need to have this small definition everywhere. But it's really nice to see how people are really like knowing stuff after a while. We dare to name things. We are a project about vaginal health. So it's the vagina, it's an anatomical region. We don't call it down under or whatever. We really want to specifically call it the way it is. But we're never offensive. We are respectful in that way. And that's very important for us as well. Our instructions are short but clear. And we acknowledge that it might be uncomfortable, a little bit stressy, and that's okay. But we're here to help them as well. And we write invitingly, telling them how innovative our research is, a little bit with the link to the past, like I told you about Isala van Diest, but also looking to the future and with all the things that they can achieve together with us. And lastly, we want to connect all the participants in the project because sometimes as a participant, you can feel alone, but we do put a lot of effort in connecting them together and with the entire world as well, all the women. So we put a lot of effort in building our community. We do that with our website. We update it regularly, but also, this is a short in between. So web developer is super proud that our website is very sustainable and has a low emission rate. And we use WordPress for that. And also very active on social media. So we do live streams, Q&A, just important holidays, we celebrate them. So on Instagram, on Twitter, and since last night on LinkedIn. So go check it out. I have no post yet, but it's coming. Something that's also very important to us is engaging with our community by content creation. So what do? We write blogs, but not just us. We invite people to write blogs about their research, about their lives. And we send out recurrent newsletters, not the boring kinds. You know how you like get newsletters, you're like, oh, every day there is news. But we try to really have them seasonal with research updates, short, and we track our impact via MailChimp. So we check how many times people opened them, did they click further, how long they took to read it all. So this is also a tip that MailChimp is very easy. You can also check whether it comes into your junk mail or not. Then we are very creative with our communication tools. So for example, you can see, this is one of our participants. She got a kid during COVID and she made a whole photo shoot with it and sent us the pictures for fun, which is really nice. So you have the two samples to take vaginal swabs, but I'm not gonna go into detail about those. As you can see, I don't know if this works. So there you see some cards. These are conversation starters with all kinds of topics, so people can really use them and discuss with their friends. But because it was COVID, we had to be creative, so we also made an online platform. So we have per card a blog with some data and a personal story by a researcher. It can go about miscarriage, about vaginal infections, about HPV vaccines. And we invite people to really engage in a conversation with us online, anonymously, if they would like to. And as I said before, infographics really are your new best friend. I think it's always good to think about yourself. I know myself, I'm not really keen of reading instruction manuals. I'm like, where are the pictures? And I'll just learn that way how to do it. And that's why we also, for Isala, we try to do all kinds of instructions. So we do infographics, but also a clear text and so on. And of course, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we had more than 6,000 registrations. It also comes later in my presentation, but after our sampling, we send out a feedback survey asking about all kinds of communication tools, all kinds, how they receive the results and so on, and just the different platforms as well. And there it came out that the videos were the most appreciated. More than 90% really appreciated videos. You can see our videos are just recorded with a smartphone, edited by ourselves. It doesn't have to be fancy. Your participants also know that you're scientists and they appreciate honesty in that sense. But for us, it's also important to show the researchers behind the project, because it's such an intimate project, you kind of do need to build a trust with them. And because it's also, we ask a lot of questions, a lot of sexual health related questions, reproductive health, and for them to take their own vaginal samples. So we are very open and keen in talking about ethical and privacy regulations. So we tell them, and this is also advice for you, to check whether you need approval from an ethical committee, whether you also need to contact your data protection officer. So every university has one. If you have human samples, you're obliged to store them in a biobank as well. And also, this is advice for everyone, stay up to date with the GDPR regulations. They change often, and this is something very important as well. We use Qualtrics as a survey tool. It's GDPR proof, it's free, and it's very user-friendly in our experience. And something that I really advise everyone is to always be honest with your participants about all the things that I just discussed above. And we repeat them on different platforms, so on our websites, on informed consents, but also in instruction manuals as well. So all this work really takes a village. It's not just a few scientists coming up with these infographics. Really, it's a board with a multidisciplinary team with bioinformaticians, biostatisticians, bioengineers, microbiologists, but also communication experts, sociologists, physicians, gynecologists, and so on. And they all have a say in what we do, and we can all come in, all discuss the things and whether or not we think it will have an impact or not. And then, of course, you can see the logos of the entire Isala team. We started just with a few, and we're growing very much. It's really nice. So as I said before, we had more than 6,000 participants, but that wasn't really the plan. So we were just looking for 200 participants. And everyone was kind of like, no one really wants or is going to take a vaginal swab. Even funding agencies didn't really believe. They thought we were super ambitious. And we went ahead anyway. We did a lot of effort, put extra effort in our storytelling. And because we didn't have a big budget, we focused a lot on social media to recruit. It was during the COVID pandemic. We wanted to recruit at the 8th of March, you know, International Women's Day, but then lockdown happened. As you remember, everything everywhere was COVID news. Eventually, we waited 2 weeks, so we were impatient and just launched. And we were very happy with the results. It like exploded everywhere. And the nice thing is, it could be because of COVID and people wanted something else. But I also like to believe it was because people were waiting for a project on women's health as well. So we're looking for 200 participants. And then this number is higher at more than 6,000 registrations within 10 days. And then we all had a little bit of a mental breakdown because we had no money. So we stopped registrations after 10 days and then had like a crisis meeting on how to deal with it. But we dealt with it. It was 2020. So we're all good now. And we started with the team and hired a lot of job students because we did a lot of things ourselves. If you have a small budget, making the kits ourselves, printing the logos, doing the registrations. There is actually a lot of logistics. I know all these things and they will never appear in my PhD thesis. So here I am talking about them. And eventually we analyzed those results. But as the speaker said before, you need to give back to your community. They put a lot of effort. Our surveys took 40 minutes. They were filled out by more than 4,600 people. So we do want to thank them and give back. So we had our first positive results. I'm not going to go too detailed into the science, but what we wanted to know, what our main questions was, are the vaginas in Belgium healthy? yay, they were very healthy. And then we had some cool graphs that nobody understood. So we translated them to a pie chart, and people think like, ooh, a pie chart is so sciencey. Now I get science. But of course, as we all know, we always timely communicate with the science world. We have our publications, we have our preprints. But for us, it was important to communicate to our participants. And publications take forever, as you know. So we decided to first communicate to the public. And we did that using, again, infographics. So this is one of those. We selected a little bit of data. This is also advice. I know every project has loads of data. We had thousands of rows, but also hundreds of columns, but you need to select the ones that you want to communicate now to have a sustainable communication over the months, over the years, because you always have something to say. So we focused on some hot topics or some things people really were keen on knowing. And I was also very nicely received. I do want to say, and one of the speakers before said it as well, it's good to have a good relationship with the press. So we do have some rules when we would like to publish. We say that we really want to read the article after the interview to check if there's some words, some different nuances. Otherwise, we don't do the interview. And that's up until now worked very well, especially with a project on vaginal health, but before also sexual health is also sometimes a topic that is quite intimate. But then I do also want to advise is not to communicate first to the press and then later to your participants, because your participants will feel left out. They'll be like, how about us? We did all this effort. But also not the other way around, because if you have a lot of participants, and there are also some journalists, some bloggers, then it gets out and then you don't have any control on what is going out. So we did it all in the same day. If you have a project that focuses on healthcare, then also have a webpage for medical professionals. People will go to their doctors or just friends or people who want to learn a bit more. So it's good to communicate to them as well. So this is an example of the vaginal bacteria that we assigned people to some groups. This is Lactobacillus crispatus. We went into detail telling them you're not alone. There are 1,300 more women also having Lactobacillus crispatus. This is how it looks like. This is what it does in the vagina. So a little bit of science, not too detailed. Don't add references in there. I know you got it from other papers, but still. And then, of course, we also communicated to the participants. So this is a profile of myself. It's from 2 years ago, so I'm okay with it, sharing it, because the vaginal microbiome changes all the time. But this is what our participants got. So we told them which is your dominant type, which kind of other bacteria are in your vagina, because there are a lot of vaginal microorganisms, and then a pie chart. Side note, in the feedback survey, a lot of people were also like, oh my God, I really loved the pie chart. It makes me feel like a scientist. So while our bioinformaticians hate pie charts, they're like, oh, this is really unnuanced. People love them. So you gotta find the middle with it. Another important thing for citizen science is who do you reach? It is known that citizen science has a biased outreach. Studies have shown that white middle-aged men of a higher socioeconomic status will participate in such projects. And for us, it was important that the results that we gather, who do they represent? They don't represent the entire Belgian female community. So we set up a demographic profile of our Isala participants. And indeed, it were people with a higher socioeconomic status, of Belgian origin, well-educated. Of course, we had some diversity. We had 99, we had people that are associated with 99 different cultures, but that were more in a minority. So for us, it was important for next calls, because Isala is not done yet. How can we be more inclusive? How can we have more representation? So we set up a few interviews and focus groups. This is now just results from the Moroccan and Turkish group, but we're also having focus groups with people of lower socioeconomic background. And here we learned that awareness is very important. As a scientist, it's good to be aware of the diverse community and not just communicate from your own background, which is maybe home alone with your right family in Leuven, which is fine as well, but it's good to also be aware of the difference. Language is also very important. Don't just Google Translate your web pages. The message in your text is very important, how it comes across. So there are also cultural differences. That's why it's good to hire someone to read your text that is really also culturally appropriate. Trust is also very important. So some groups don't trust scientists immediately. We've seen that also in COVID, and trust is something that is hard to build. So that's why it's good to look at who do they trust anyways if they don't trust scientists at this moment. And for example, we have learned that GPs as an intermediary are very good trust people. So if you have a project reaching out to some communities, keep them into account. And it's also good to understand that things are taboo, but sometimes we think that in some communities things are really taboo, but they're not really the case. We just think so. And it's good to give some extra information for some communities as others. And this is specifically for Isala. We were happy to hear from the focus groups that they appreciated our subtlety in communication. It wasn't just out there immediately pushing boundaries, but just slowly pushing up towards them. And then I just want to tell you about Isala. When we go to different conferences, it was nice that we could inspire other researchers around the world with this message. And we're now setting up this sisterhood on vaginal microbiome research in different countries as well. So we have the Laura project in Peru. So this is also bottom-up initiated from researchers there. So we have them in the Amazon, the highlands, and the coast. We call it Laura because for us it's important that the people there have an emotional connection to this role model as well. And then we also have the Marie projects in Switzerland, and now having some nice conversations with Spain, the UK, and the US as well. So what are my takeaway messages of this maybe long talk? Is don't underestimate the communication. So before Isala started, I went to an event just like this, and there was this speaker, and she was like, don't underestimate communication, you'll be shocked by it. And I was like taking notes. I'm not gonna do it, I'm gonna be better. And I'm still, I mean, I take 2 hours to make one Instagram post instead of like writing my article. You just keep thinking about, eventually you will get better at it, but just take into account that it takes a long time because you need to think twice on how it will be received. You need to let it check by different people as well. And don't underestimate the financial cost. If you want to do it properly, it sometimes takes quite some money. Depends on your project. Do you want decent infographics? But as I told you before, we also did a lot of things ourselves, but some things we really did outsource. Also look at your university. What do they have available for your web page? Maybe it can be a landing page from there as well. So really look for help. As I said before, build your community, keep it engaged and committed. Not immediately, you recruit, you got your recruits, and that was it. And now we do the science, we're all in the lab doing DNA extractions and PCR. It takes a lot of effort, so if you have a big team, divide it. Respect everyone's privacy. I think this is very important for all kinds of projects, but especially for Isala, which is of an intimate kind. And an easy how-to video and infographics, they really go a long way. Start making friends fast and everywhere. That's something that I also learned because a project like this is not just a one-woman show, it's a big team. It's all different people, not just scientists, so that's also very important as well. And keep asking yourself the whole time this question: are you inclusive? Can you do better? How can you do that? And I do believe that we can reach everyone. We just need to go the extra mile to do so. And lastly, even when you start early, you will always run out of time. So we just advise to do it and just jump and do it as well. And then maybe just an extra slide for today because it's an extra special day for Isala. This is the second day in a row, because we did last summer as well, that we're communicating our results. So go check our Instagram, our Twitter, our website, everywhere actually, and follow us. And I want to end by thanking so many people that don't fit on this slide, but I want to thank our entire Isala team, our funding agencies, our collaborators, and I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Many thanks, Sarah, for your inspiring testimonial. I'm sure you'll make many attendees think about citizen science. So now it's time for our last speaker of this session, and that is Marijke Huysmans, professor in groundwater hydrology at the VUB. The last few years, she helped make the general public aware of the problems our country is facing with regard to becoming more resilient against drought. She used a variety of channels in her aim to achieve impact, and she'll tell us all about this in her presentation.
Okay, good morning. My name is Marijke Huysmans. It doesn't move. So I'm a professor at this university, at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel, and my interests are groundwater modeling, drought, and sustainable water management in general. So until 2 years ago, my professional life was mostly doing research and teaching about those topics. But then 2 years ago, my professional life changed quite drastically from one day to another, almost literally. Suddenly, I started spending a lot of my time on outreach, media interviews, but also working as a policy advisor, member of several expert panels about groundwater and drought. So today I want to reflect with you a bit on what happened in the last 2 years. Why did I suddenly become such important in the media? How did this happen? What was the impact of that? But also what are the pitfalls I encountered, and also what have I learned from that journey? As a disclaimer, I should maybe say that I'm also myself still finding my way in this world of media communication, so I definitely don't have all the answers ready myself. So what happened in 2020? Well, obviously we were confronted with a quite intense, long period of drought, resulting in water restrictions, also resulting in impact for nature, agriculture, our drinking water distribution, and so on. And this is obviously something I didn't control. Whether your topic is covered in the media and in the news is something you can obviously not completely control, and some topics obviously are more easy to get covered in the media than others. But at the same time, it was not a complete coincidence that during that period of drought, journalists started calling me. Because already a few months before this period of drought, I actually decided that I wanted to spend more time in communication. And one of the reasons for that is a bit of frustration, actually, on how my topic was covered in the media, because the people talking about groundwater were not always groundwater experts. So it was not always correctly covered, not with the right focus. And also, obviously, I thought it was not covered enough. And so I decided I wanted to get my message across, which is essentially that drought is an underestimated threat, even in Belgium, where everybody always complains about the rain, that we should prepare ourselves to become less vulnerable against drought, also offering solutions. What can we do to become less vulnerable? And that would, of course, need changes in policy. That was one of the impacts I was aiming for, but also changes in behavior, changes in perception, changes in knowledge, in everybody that uses water, which is essentially everybody, of course. So the general public, but also industry, farmers, and so on. So I think my story is a bit different than the previous stories where people were communicating about a specific research project, while my story is much more a general message about all the expertise I have based on the decades I've been doing research. And also it's not all based on my own research. It's also based on research from other people. So I was really aiming for an impact based on everything I had discovered in the past decades. So then how did I end up in the newspapers and on television and on the radio? To be honest, I don't really know. You never really know how people have found you, but of course there are some things that helped that I can identify. For sure, what helped is that some colleagues that were already in the media transferred journalists to me when they got a question about water or groundwater. Also, obviously, the press and communication services from the university also transferred journalists to me. So first advice is when you are prepared to communicate in the media, make sure that your press offices in your university and also your colleagues that already have contacts with journalists know that you are prepared to do so, and that you also let them know what you are prepared to talk about. Then what also had an important impact, because several journalists told me that they found me, was a video I made for the Universiteit van Vlaanderen. I guess you're all familiar with that initiative. They make mini lectures and short videos about topics that scientists can explain to a general public. Several journalists told me, we have called you because we have seen your video from the Universiteit van Vlaanderen. So if they call you, even though you spend a lot of time in making such a video or lecture, and even though it can be scary and stressful, try to overcome that, say yes, because it has a big impact. Then what is also important is that your page on the university, which everybody has, is informative. For many people, these pages are not informative at all. It does not mention your function, no picture, no list of your expertise. That is really the minimum, that if people want to find you, that they can find you and they easily know who you are, what is your function, what do you want to communicate about, what is your expertise. Also, there are a number of expert databases where you can insert that information. All these things help to be found. Later on, it was actually also direct contacts with journalists that helped a lot to get my message across. After a while, you get to learn which journalists in which newspapers cover which topics, and then, of course, after a while, you get to know them. Then what also helped me a lot in getting my message across was Twitter. You love it or you hate it, and there are obviously disadvantages and advantages of being active on Twitter, but for me, it really helped a lot to get my message across. The reality is that a lot of journalists and policymakers are on Twitter looking for inspiration, looking for news, looking for people, and it really helps. When I started tweeting about groundwater, I had maybe like 40 followers, just people that I knew. I was not active at all, but I just started tweeting as if I had a big audience, and automatically it grows, it grows, it grows. So you just have to start getting your message out there, and it has happened very, very regularly that my tweets became news in two different ways. I tweet something and I get calls from journalists, or even they just quote my tweet. A very time-efficient way to do science communication. Even without an interview, they just take pieces of a tweet and they put it in a newspaper article. If you want to be active on Twitter, it's again very important that your bio is informative. It should say what you are and what your expertise is. To tweet regularly, even if your audience is not yet very big, it grows by tweeting regularly. And also try to make your tweets exciting. Don't just write, click here for my newest paper on, but for example, raise a question. Have you ever wondered, and then refer to the paper to find the answer. A big advantage of Twitter is that you keep control of when you communicate, what you communicate, what is the focus, what is the message, because as I will explain later in this talk, when you only communicate through newspapers or television or radio, your message does not always ends up the way you meant it, or the focus of your message gets changed, or they just pick out certain details and so on. And on Twitter, obviously, you are fully in control of what your message is. Also, Twitter is a very good media to also add a bit of personality and humor. I would advise you to do science communication in an authentic way, a way that fits your personality. If you're not always super serious in your professional life, then I also think it's good to not be always super serious in your communication. And Twitter is really, I think, a good platform to do so. Another way that really worked for me was maintaining a blog. So I have a blog in Dutch, and it's essentially where I debunk myths about groundwater. Many people don't know what groundwater is, don't know how it works. There are a lot of misconceptions, misunderstandings on how groundwater works. So in this blog, I try to debunk these myths. It is for the general public, so deliberately I keep the blog posts very short, 3 minutes read, simple terms, everybody should be able to understand it. And I mix a bit posts that relate to something that is in the news, but also posts related to our research. So you can, again, you can decide yourself what you blog about. You are fully in control of what you blog about. And again, many of my blog posts have become news articles. So journalists read the blog, they call me, ask some questions, it ends up as a newspaper article. And it is a very, very comfortable situation to talk to a journalist that has already read your blog, because they know already the basics, they know what your message is, and the number of misunderstandings is significantly reduced when they already know what you want to say, essentially. Another way to keep control of your message is, of course, writing an opinion article. It's actually not so difficult to get an opinion published. Newspapers and magazines are always looking out for opinion articles. And again, there you can write what you want, your message with your focus. For me, the whole communication journey really went from nothing to getting sometimes 10 calls a day. So it can go really fast, because in media communication, it's a bit all or nothing. They don't know you or they know you, and then you get calls all the time. And for me, it has been very, very intense, a bit of an avalanche I'm still trying to recover from. Which means that while you're in that very intense period, you don't really have time to think a lot about how do I want to approach this, what do I want to communicate about, what do I want to do, what don't I want to do. So it is good for you to already reflect a bit on what do you want to do and what not. For example, you're all here, so I guess you would all be comfortable to communicate to a journalist to cover your own research in a newspaper, but would you also be prepared to talk about a more general topic, which is still related to your research, but not something you have done research about? Or would you even be prepared to communicate about your broader field in general? Or, as some academics do, are you prepared to give an opinion on anything, even things you actually don't have expertise about? This has been a bit of a struggle for me. And for now, my rule of thumb is if the word groundwater will be in the article, I will do it. And even though if other aspects of water are covered, I can also explain them. But if it's an article fully on, for example, making drinking water from seawater, which is really not my expertise, I will refer to a colleague. But it's a personal decision, but it's good to think, what do I feel comfortable about and what not? A similar question is also in what media do you feel comfortable communicating? I think all of you would be okay in communicating about your research in a very serious newspaper, but would you feel comfortable, for example, in being in a late night talk show talking about your topic, where you obviously need to simple down your message a lot and also be prepared to get some jokes about your research, for example. I do everything, essentially. So I have been in the late night talk shows. I've written a children's book on water. I've also been in Goed Gevoel and Dag Allemaal. Those are magazines typically about lifestyle and gossip. I do anything, essentially, in terms of audience, because my audience is everybody that uses water, which is, of course, everybody. But of course, it depends on who you want to reach and which impact you want to have, which decides which media you want to do and not. And obviously, each of them requires quite a different approach. Then, all this communication has had an impact. Also, a bit to my own surprise, I have discovered that you can have an impact. A few months after I started communicating about drought, I was invited to the Flemish Parliament to talk about drought and the measures we had to take. This resulted in the Blue Deal. It's a plan to make Flanders more resilient against drought and water scarcity, which is a plan in which 500 million euros of investments are foreseen. Of course, as Esther said, impact is a group effort. It's not just me that has achieved those things, but because each of us has done their piece of the puzzle, keeping communicating about the drought and the solutions, we have had an impact on policy in this case. Also, because I suddenly appeared in the newspapers, I am now member of several expert panels about water management here in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands. And you can maybe think that's a bit unfair because I am not a better researcher or my expertise is not bigger than 2 years ago when I was not communicating in the press. But the reality is that if you are prepared to put yourself out there, to communicate, to appear in the media, you will more easily get asked for those types of expert panels and you will be in a position where you can have more impact. Also, apart from this impact on policy, there is also some more indirect or more personal impact. I hear from many people that they now look at water in a different way. Also people around me that now even in their homes are taking small measures to be more water wise. I do think such things have an impact on behavior, on understanding. Also, more personally, doing all this science communication has helped me to overcome maybe some insecurities. As a child, I was super shy, and none of my teachers would ever have thought that I would be prepared to talk live on television or in the Flemish Parliament. And it's really very cool to overcome those insecurities and the self-doubt. At the same time, it's very intense because you put yourself, of course, in a vulnerable position. If everybody can see you live on television and you start questioning not only your message, but also how do I look and how does my voice sound and things like that. But if you can overcome those things, that is really, really cool. And then, as I said before, communication results in visibility, and visibility results in opportunities that I would not have had if I didn't dare to put myself out there. Also, I've met a lot of very interesting people because of all this. And in general, it also has been fun. For example, the late night talk show, it was after 9 weeks of the first very strict lockdown we were in. It was like a night out. After being stuck at home for 9 weeks, I was invited on the boat for a talk show. It was fun. Of course, not everything went always super smooth. There are definitely pitfalls. For example, on the left, you can see, you don't need to read the details, the message that I wanted to convey 2 months ago when we were again, when there was another period of drought, and I wanted to communicate what should we do to become more resilient against drought on the long term. How did it appear in the media? Oh my God, it's so dry again, and will we still be allowed to wash our car and fill our pool this summer? Obviously, I don't think that the most important impact of drought is on washing your car or filling your pool. So often your message is covered as something which is obviously much more short, more simple, with a really short-term focus instead of the long-term focus we often aim for as scientists. They really focus on the impact for people and not so much impact on nature, agriculture, and so on. And a lot of the nuance, uncertainties, assumptions that are so important for us as scientists, they are left. Also, what you should be aware of is that when you communicate to a larger public, there will be reactions. I know many of you are scared of reactions on social media, as this very nice meme that appeared 2 months ago as a reaction to an article where I was quoted. First of all, 99% of the reactions I got are positive. Although, you know, the 1% can make an impact on you. 99% of the reactions were positive. What I was not so much prepared for was reactions from colleagues and people within the water sector, especially people that don't really know how the media works, saying, Marijke, why are you causing unnecessary panic about water scarcity? Or why haven't you said this and this and this? But of course, yeah, you only can bring short, simple messages, so you cannot always cover all the detail you want. I also wrote appreciation is valuable. If you get a lot of negative reactions, if you then get maybe from your colleagues a short message, well done today on the radio, that is really appreciated. So if your colleagues do a media interview and you think they did a good job, let them know. That is really a big support. And then there are other pitfalls. I think most of them were already mentioned today. Often you prepare an interview and then it's cancelled, which can be frustrating, especially the first time it happens. Not every journalist is an expert in your field, so sometimes I really have the feeling I have to give an introduction course to hydrology on the phone. Things can be put out of context. The title above your paper about your article will often not be the one you chose for, and so on and so on. But my advice would be, let it go. Focus on what you aim for, on the impact you want to have, and that sometimes things are a bit put out of context, or maybe made a bit more simple than you would have liked. That is a bit the collateral damage we have to live with. So, to end, what have I learned in these past 2 years? You can have an impact. Just by starting communicating, you can have an impact. Make sure that people can find you online and that they know what you are about. Find ways to keep control of your message. For me, it's the Twitter and the blog and writing opinion pieces, but it can be different things for everybody. Do it your own way and enjoy the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marijke, for sharing your experiences with the participants of Let's Talk Science. So now it's time for questions. So may I invite all 4 speakers of this morning onto the stage. I'll take questions from the people here in Brussels, but if you're following online, just put your questions in the chat and they will come to me through this tablet. In fact, I already have some questions of you at home, and I'll start with one for Alexis. A question from Stien Heremans. She asks, how do you keep the stakeholder engagement alive in the longer run? Or is it okay to stay still for a while and reach out again to the same people after a period of silence? Even lang duwen. En is het dan een opstel of niet? Nee, oké.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question, and sometimes a problematic thing, I think, keeping stakeholders engaged, because you know how it goes. We get funding for a project for 3 years, for 4 years, if you're lucky, and then the project is finished. So what of course helps, as I already said, at Ghent University, we have interdisciplinary consortia that are stable, that are structurally funded, and that have the specific task of working together with stakeholders. And that's why I would also say, I think it's important that universities, but also funders, think about the long term and try to make sure that funding is also available on all longer term perspective. And that enables me, as a person working on mainly on mental health issues, to keep some stakeholders close, also involve them in a steering group, for example, of the consortium that I'm working with. And I think about stakeholders like, yeah, for me, it's a lot of clinical psychologists, but also the city of Ghent as a central stakeholder. But that being said, I know that the reality for most of you is, of course, that you get funding for a limited amount of time, and that's what it is, of course. So you have to work with what you have. I think in that sense, it is also important that we also manage expectations of stakeholders and end users as well. I think, for example, there is now the whole tendency of engaged learning involving students in real world problems. We do that as well in the Faculty of Psychology. We have this diverse neighborhood close to the faculty, and students, they go out and try to solve problems in this specific neighborhood. But it's very important, I think, to know that people, and I think it was already mentioned also by another speaker, people sometimes feel left behind, because the student finishes his or her master thesis and then he or she is gone and people are left there with their real problems. So that's a difficult issue. That's about expectations and about also communicating to your stakeholders clearly what they can expect from you and what not. And also that indeed sometimes collaborations are a timely thing. So that's, I think, what I would say about that.
Okay, thank you, Alexis. Some questions from here, from the room? Yes, there's coming a mic to you.
Hello. Yes, I really like the infographics. I wanted to know, did you do them in-house or was it something that you hired someone to do? Like, how did you work on them?
Thank you. This is a compliment to our communication office. So Bureau, so we work together with Studio Maria. Those are like two very empowering women that choose their projects specifically, and then they focus on more like women empowerment projects. So we don't do them ourselves. We do DNA extractions and PCRs ourselves. But that's indeed, as I said before, depending on your project, maybe it's also good to realize that you don't need to be an inventor of everything. I think in academia, we're kind of used to the idea to be doing everything, be a manager, be a scientist, and so on. But it's good to have, there are a lot of people with expertise. They cost a little bit of money, and that's why it's good is when you're applying for funding to keep an extra budget for communication. And some stuff you do yourselves, like we did our videos, but infographics, we're just not that good designers, and Canva is not really always an option.
Amber de Grote also has some questions for you, Sarah, about the Isala project. She asks, was there an advantage for the participants when contributing to the project? Was it time consuming for them? And would you always recommend to go to the press if a researcher is in need for participants?
Okay, so the first question, was there an advantage? Something that I also learned in the beginning is for citizen science. While a lot of clinical studies, they give a financial reward or just free cinema tickets or whatever, the impact is the opposite for citizen science. There are some studies that really looked at why would people participate in citizen science, and it's not always for the return, but it's more for being part of society, helping for a better future. And if these are really their goals of participating, you giving them money is actually giving them the opposite attention. So we didn't give them any financial cost, but what they got in return is they got their personal results, they were part of this community, and we really emphasized that they were contributing to this together. So we do on our social media a lot of sharing of testimonies. So I think it's more of a reward in that kind. What was the next? Was
it time consuming?
Time consuming, yes. I'm not gonna sit here and say that, oh, I just do like a few minutes a day. It takes a lot of work, especially in the beginning, because you're just training and see what it works. My advice is also is not to be everywhere, to see where your participants are, see which platforms they use and be there. If it's now, it's TikTok, but everyone in our team is already older and TikTok is just, so we're now hiring some Gen Z people to do that. But it depends on your message. So I think your research project, see where you need to make sure that your research is being done and then be focused on, we now divide things, who does the web page, who does the Instagram, depending on who is in which phase in their PhD. But in the beginning, it was a small team, and I do have to say that I neglected my research for a few months, but it was really worth it. And then go to the press.
Would you always recommend to go to the press when in need for participants?
It depends, because we think that the press has a broader reach, which is not. This also has a biased reach. If you read the standard of the Morgen, it's different people. But for Isala, it was a good thing because we had no funding, so we used social media, and then we had all kinds of young people. And with the press, we also reached more of an older generation. So we now have participants between 18 and 98. So we do have a lot of older women, which is really nice. I specifically call with them to help them fill out the survey, because they always like, oh, my computer just all of a sudden turned off. So I advise to go to the press depending on your project, because if you go to the press, be prepared that a lot of people are going to ask you questions on the things that you don't know yet and are going to research. But it's a good way to be as diverse as possible, but don't overestimate it. So what we are going to do with Isala now is to focus on micro-influencers in specific, more marginalized groups, and like the gatekeepers that you actually refer to, is to go to put that extra effort to be a little bit more inclusive.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from here within the room? Hannelore is coming to you.
Hello, is this working? Yeah. Thank you for your presentations. They were quite inspiring, I would say. They were also very good, but I felt that the things that you were showing, the topics, the threads, are quite sellable. I won't say they are easy to sell, but that they are possible to sell. And in many cases, which I consider my case, doing fundamental research, studying like a protein, a useless protein, or at least something that we don't know what it does yet, and we cannot really link it to a disease or something palpable to society, it's not as easy to sell. So if we have the ambition to get some impact, how can we do that when studying such a, let's say, a groundbreaking thing that it's very difficult for society to understand? How can we do this when studying this? And that I don't have any person really to ask. I guess it's for everyone.
Yeah.
Who wants to take this question? Esther.
You're not alone with that question. I get that question every time. I think I mentioned it slightly. It is just being part of the group and being part of a pathway. And your stakeholders might not be immediate societal agents or whatever, but it is important that you understand where your research topic is somewhere placed within society. And just work back from that. Think about, so what are the activities and the outputs that I need to be having to get my message across, however blue sky or however fundamental it still is. Who is then the audience for that message? And in your case, that might be just other scientists, other researchers. And so one of the things that we try to incentivize within our university is, because of that impact planning and that impact idea, is interdisciplinarity. It's actually looking across the boundaries of your own discipline and finding people that might help you get that impact out there. So by collaborating and by people understanding your message through your communication, so use the same tips that all these people have given you about communicating about your topic. There are stakeholders and audiences out there that will pick it up and use it in their impact pathway, for instance. And so your impact might be through others by proxy, and that's equally important. I think it's important that the exchange between society and research is both ways. Sometimes we are heavily influenced by what society needs. Sometimes it's science itself that comes up with issues that we as a society haven't even thought about. And this two-way system needs to exist. That's what pushes research forward as well. It's a bit more philosophical than practical, but it's a starting point.
Anyone else who wants to elaborate on that? Or
Well, I once read an article in Weekend Knak, and it was a female mathematician, and she had this theory about how she used mathematics on dating life of people. So the basic idea was, if you want to successfully date, then you go to a club, a nightclub, and you have to select people. And if you do that, the chances are much higher that you will find a partner that suits you than when you just stand there and let people come to you. This was a mathematics. So to give you just an example of how mathematics can then suddenly become something which everyone can relate to. So I found that's really interesting. And I think you also mentioned, like, you can also talk about your broader field. It does not have to be about that very specific millimeter that you are doing research on. It can also be about your broader field. And I'm quite sure that if you're passionate about something, that you will be able to write a good narrative about that. So find your own interesting story, and I'm sure you will be able to sell it.
I think also for Isala, for example, we all think 50% of the people have a vagina, so everyone cares. But we do a lot of, so our project is also mostly funded by the ERC, so 80% of our research is fundamental. So we really look at microbe interactions and all that. So we also, again, look at the broader field of, okay, let's talk about menstrual pain, menstrual leave as well, because people care about that. So I would also look at what is more the application-wise, and then in beginning see, like, who do you want to reach? We don't always want to reach everyone, and that's good. And I like the comment about proxy.
Okay. I've got a question from Nicolaas van den Steen, who is following at home, a question for Marijke. He asks, aren't you afraid that your objectivity would be compromised if you write an opinion article? And how do you avoid being associated with political parties once you express your opinion?
Oh, I don't think that is a huge risk. I write my opinion based on research and numbers and models. And of course, I need politicians to put that into policy and legislation. But really, for me, I don't mind from which political party those politicians are. What I want to achieve is that they take our recommendations and put it into policy. So, yeah, maybe I'm a bit... It is true that politicians will sometimes cherry pick a bit things that you say. That has happened. For example, last year there was a bit of commotion because a certain city gave fines to people that had too much pavements in their gardens. And there was a lot of commotion because, of course, it's very sensitive if you tell people that they should change their garden because water should infiltrate. And then indeed some politicians said, look, Professor Huysmans says that this is the right policy because she says that this and this and this. Yes, this happens, but yeah, in the end, yeah, I try to focus on what I want to achieve. I want to achieve that we will be better prepared for drought and that this needs better policies and also needs changes in behaviors in the public and in industry and farmers. Yes, and sometimes, obviously, I am associated to certain political parties and certain ministers because the ministers that are responsible for water and environment do have a certain political color. But yeah, I don't see a big risk in there because I think, as a scientist, I stay objective. Yeah, I don't know if that's really a good answer to the question. There is a bit of tension there, but in general, yeah, focus on what you want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else who has thoughts on this? Not directly. Okay. More questions here? Where's the mic? There he comes.
I was wondering if your visibility in the media and coverage in the news also had an impact on your ability, for example, to secure new research grants. Maybe you have been contacted by other researchers to say, let's work together, or you have noticed that suddenly your acceptance rate for ERC proposals has increased or dropped for whatever reason. Did anyone experience some relation there?
The answer is yes. So it is. You can think it's fair or unfair, but the reality is that because you are visible, there will be opportunities. And I have many people contacted me in the past 2 years to do projects jointly or to involve me as a partner in the project. Also, of course, because they want visibility for their projects, and that's also something they see as an advantage. Also, what happened is that suddenly everybody wanted to have lunch with me because they thought that I have power and impact and money, which is not true, but don't tell everybody. So it is true that the visibility results in a number of other opportunities. Yes.
Any recommendations how to handle it?
Yeah, recommendations. I was just going to say, in my case, not directly, but of course, I think you had more visibility in that way. It depends also on the topic. There are also, of course, different funders, and if you have more visibility, private funders will notice you. Of course, if you go for a Horizon Europe proposal, for example, European funding, I would say it might less have a direct impact. But on the other hand, for European funding, it's commonplace that you would write an impact section, for example, how you are going to achieve impact. If you then can also prove that you had previous experience with achieving impact and that you indeed had some visibility in the media, this will help you build a case. So in that sense, I agree. So it can come from different ways. Private funders who see you, who find you, and who are willing to give you a budget, but also just gaining expertise in communication.
Okay, maybe a last question. I see someone there, or
hello. Since you started engaging with social science communication and impact, have you noticed any difference in the way that you teach or in the way that your research interests have been affected? I don't know if it's clear.
I think definitely. If I don't give so many lectures, I'm not a professor, but when I teach, I already try to pick in on what is already talked about, because your students are also just part of the public. And how it impacted our research is, for citizen science, it is key that it's not just the researcher, it's also the citizens that come up with questions. And I think it really makes our research way better, because we all kind of want to have, I hope, have a diverse research team, because researchers are not neutral. We all come with our background or different perspectives and ask research questions because of that. We see that in the past, there were not a lot of female researchers. There was less research done on menstrual pain, because if you don't have a uterus, you don't ask yourself that question. That's okay. But you will never have a lab meeting where you have all the perspectives of society. And that's why citizen science might be interesting, because people from society come with their questions. They will say like, hey, I'm from Morocco or from Turkey, and we always ate a lot of fermented foods. There are a lot of bacteria there. How do they reach the vagina, for example? And then you're like, oh, we never thought about this, and we go into detail. Or, hey, about my underwear, and so on. So we do actually have 3 PhD students now that really focus on questions that came from the public. It's not that we still have our fundamental questions. It's not that we shift direction all of a sudden. We do have our projects, but we do link them to really questions that are asked. So for us in particular, it really is like this co-creation in that sense. I don't know if someone else wants to.
Well, one thing I certainly learned from engaging with stakeholders and co-creating is becoming less naive as a researcher, and understanding, if you want to have impact with your research, how difficult that is. But I think what for me is the big challenge is that I see 2 important movements when we're talking about societal impact. The one is more like bottom up. Those are stakeholders who are confronted with real world problems, like the city of Ghent and the Keizerspark, for example, with youth causing problems. They often develop tools or methods to try to solve it, but these tools are rarely evidence-based. On the other hand, what I see in academia is I see a lot of excellent research, beautiful research results. But then at a certain moment, these researchers realize, oh, I want to do something with my research, and okay, let's develop a smartphone application to solve the problem. And then they realize, oh, nobody uses my smartphone application. And then we're 50,000 euros later. So these are, and I think for me, the big challenge is to bringing both closer together, where you have the real world problems and stakeholders that look for solutions, and also making sure that researchers become less naive and do not just think that, despite the fact that their research is so fabulous, that nobody per se is waiting for that aspect. And you need you need different kinds of expertise to really solve real world problems. So that for me is a bit,
Yeah, it's a really good question. For me, how it affected my teaching is that I think I refer more to what is in the news. Obviously, that link is much stronger, which students really appreciate. I can see that there is more attention when I talk about things that are in the news today. And also, of course, I do science communication to share a lot of expertise, but also I learned so much in the past 2 years. One reason is because I'm much more involved in policy, so I understand much better how those things work. So these are obviously also things I can share with my students, but also because sometimes questions from the general public or from journalists are really surprising questions, and I'm like, I never thought of this before. And then the question trigger some curiosity with me, so I start finding out things myself and looking up for numbers and looking other papers. So I learned a lot in doing science communication, because I also think I should be able to answer their questions. And I think that helps a lot in my teaching, because then I can, of course, also share those things.
Thank you. Esther, you too? No? So with that, we have come to the end of this plenary session. I would like to thank all of our speakers for being here this morning and sharing their knowledge with us. I'd like to thank you too, the participants here and at home, for listening and for your participation. And next up, for those on campus, is lunch and/or simultaneous information market, where you can meet the science communication units of all 5 Flemish universities. You'll find both the lunch and the information market in the same room as where you registered this morning. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Let's Talk Science.